Into the Deep, Chapter 3, Becoming a Scientist. As Margie and I headed east, our horizons expanded with each mile. We made our way through deserts and tumbleweeds for about 12 hours to El Paso, then through another 9 hours of parched landscape to Dallas. We pulled over to watch a huge flock of Canada geese heading north to Yankee country, just like us. It seemed improbable now, looking back on a life spent exploring the planet, but at that time I had never even been east of the Mississippi River. We crossed it at Vicksburg and toured the battle where Grant starved the Confederates out of a fort up on the bluffs. I walked the terrain, imagining the battle unfolding. After that, Atlanta and then Washington, D.C. for my magical first view of the nation's monuments. Finally up to Boston and our first taste of New England, a chaotic March snowstorm. I woke up the next morning, put on my crisp dress blues, ready for my first day at work, and immediately had to change back into jeans to dig the VW out of the snow. It was a difficult introduction to the Northeast for a beachcomber from Southern California, and my first days at the Office of Naval Research weren't much better. I'd been training to be a warrior in the Army. Then I got a great job designing submersibles and working on my PhD. Being activated by the Navy had meant a sharp detour with a huge pay cut. But here I was. I figured I'd do my duty and then head back to California. My work involved monitoring grants for research institutions, just pushing around a bunch of papers, really. I was the liaison officer to several schools, MIT, the University of Rhode Island, and the University of New Hampshire among them. By far my largest grant recipient was the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, about an hour and a half drive south of Boston. I knew very little about Woods Hole. I dreamed for so long to join Scripps that I hadn't really focused on the East Coast rival, which was also home to a variety of research scientists studying the oceans. WHOI, as they call it, was located in a little New England village, quaint cottages with slate shingled roofs, while Scripps was classic Southern California, rolling surf and all. In oceanographic circles, it's a little bit like the Yankees versus the Red Sox, and it didn't take long before I realized that I should spend a whole lot of time there. There I was amid all the LL Bean apparel in my blue winter uniform. I wandered across the Water Street drawbridge over the narrow inlet connecting Nantucket Sound with the Eel Pond, a small lagoon dominated by the Captain Kidd Bar and Seafood Shack. And then, as I shivered on the bridge, I noticed something out on the pond. Trim, white, 21 feet long, there it was, Alvin, a submersible capable of carrying 3 people down to explore the ocean to a depth of 6,000 feet. Owned by the Navy, but operated by Woods Hole, it was on the pond undergoing some sort of testing. I was mesmerized by the sight of it and my sense of what it could do. Alvin was the only submersible at any American oceanographic institution. Scripps didn't even have one. Up until then, exploration of the deep sea floor were conducted from the ocean's surface using sonar and other remote detection techniques. I could see that Alvin would make it possible for scientists to go underwater themselves and maneuver around to explore with their own eyes. That made it my kind of sea craft. Already it had proven its worth by locating a hydrogen bomb that had fallen from an Air Force bomber during a mid-air collision and had sunk to the bottom of the Mediterranean. The thought of working in a manned submarine that relied on direct visual observation was exciting, just the sort of science I wanted to practice. That first day at Woods Hole, I made up my way through the gauntlet of introductions. It was like meeting the gods. First came the director of Woods Hole, Paul Fry. When I bragged about going to sea on Scripps vessels, he hit me with the gimlet eye and said, "Well, it's nice to see you have finally worked your way up to the greatest oceanographic institution in the world." After I met Kenneth Emery, known as K.O., an expert on continental shelves and one of the most celebrated students at Francis Shepherd, the famous marine geologist. I also made a point of meeting Bill Rainey, a former Navy submarine officer who ran Woods Hole Deep Submersible Group. He was Alvin's gatekeeper. Over the next 2 years, they all welcomed me to Woods Hole Circle. Dr. Emery even invited me to go out on Woods Hole research vessels as part of the science team, and my Navy boss said fine. It felt like I was back in graduate school. My dreams weren't on hold anymore. I started going full throttle, total focus. Alvin's crew chief, George Broderson, or Brody for short, nicknamed me the White Tornado because of the way I sailed through Woods Hole in my summer white uniform, letting out all my pent-up energy. Call it luck, call it whatever. Somehow I had ended up in a perfect place, and I found myself being embraced like a member of the family. Through a contact at my Navy office, I started hanging out with the Boston Sea Rovers, the most prestigious dive club on the planet. They were a hardy, eclectic group of about 20 men who didn't mind freezing in the North Atlantic. We'd suit up and jump into the cold, dark water each weekend during dive season to search for lobsters, coming up with a supermarket full of food. One of my favorite guys in the group, Joe Homan, was so strong that he could carry 2 big air tanks on his back. He'd just stick his hand in the hole and let the lobster bite him, and then he'd pull up these 20-pound suckers. At the end of the day, we all go to the deserted island, fill the trash can with moss, and cook up our catch. After each feast, we'd jump into the water to wash off the butter running down our wetsuits. For our annual weekend-long clinic, we'd kick off Friday night with a cocktail party at a grand place we called the Castle. Saturdays there were prominent speakers from the underwater world like Jacques Piccard, who had taken the Navy bathysphere Trieste 38,500 feet down to Challenger depth, the deepest part of the ocean. Saturday nights we'd watch films and explore the oceans. Once several members presented Frank Scali, the master of ceremonies, with a huge lobster. They walked across the stage like a dog on a leash, filling the room with raucous laughter. Each year's weekend wrapped up with a lobster bake at Frank's home. He was a scuba diver who represented U.S. Divers, a company owned by Jacques Cousteau, who was introducing scuba and underwater exploration to the world through television series like The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau. It's hard to express how much the Sea Rovers would influence my life. I watched how the best speakers drew us into their presentations with colorful underwater images. I met some of the best underwater photographers and filmmakers, Louis Mardin and Bates Little Hales, for example, who worked for the National Geographic Society. I also met Melville Bell Grosvenor, the Society's president and editor of the National Geographic magazine from 1957 to 1967. He was the grandson of Alexander Graham Bell, inventor of the telephone and first president of the National Geographic Society. At the Sea Rovers meetings, I met the most famous underwater personalities of the time. Al Giddings, the cinematographer who would film The Abyss and Titanic, among others. Rob and Valerie Taylor, known for films that got up close with sharks. Harold Egerton, an MIT engineer who worked with Cousteau and others on underwater technologies. Eugenie Clark, an ichthyologist and scuba pioneer nicknamed the Shark Lady. Paul Tismoslis, early advocate of scuba and publisher of Skin Diver magazine. Joe McInnes, known for intrepid polar dives. Stan Waterman, pioneer diver, creator of underwater films and television specials. And Peter Gimbel, who dove to and photographed Andrea Doria. Jacques Cousteau and his son Philippe often joined us as well. I listened to some of the rovers describe how they love to pull on their scuba gear and dive on the wrecks of small ships and pleasure craft. I got really caught up in that idea. I must have wanted to up the ante because Joe Holman remembers even back then, in the late 1960s, I talked about wanting to find the Titanic. Gee, I don't know what this guy is smoking or drinking, Joe remembers thinking. He reviewed my riffs on searching for Titanic, he says today, as just pipe dreams. He viewed my riffs on searching for the Titanic, he says today, as just a pipe dream. Then in 1969, the Navy upended my life again. The Vietnam War was draining the Pentagon budget, so the Navy needed to make cuts. Junior research officers like me were given a choice: commit to a full-time career in the Navy or get out. I wanted to get my PhD, but I also needed a job. I will never forget how Dr. Emery and Bill Rene supported me at this time when I really needed it. Dr. Emery suggested I enroll in Woods Hole PhD program, but when other officials decided I couldn't enroll in a degree program while I also worked there, Dr. Emery bailed me out again, arranging for me to commute to the University of Rhode Island's Graduate School of Oceanography to finish my doctorate. Meanwhile, Renier said not to worry about a job. I was such a great talker that he'd hire me to promote Alvin in the ocean science community. If only there was another sunken H-bomb to search for, we'd get all the attention we needed, I remember Bill saying, and I told him that if only Alvin could find the Titanic, everyone would want to use it. So I found myself out of the Navy and back in the oceanographic research. The main thrust of my research was the geologic survey of the Gulf of Maine's seabed. The concept of plate tectonics was just gaining traction, the theory that the planet's surface consists of large crustal plates that bump into, grind against, and pull apart from one another in a massive synchronized ballet. Plates may move away from one another, creating new crust, or they may move towards each other, with the old plates diving back inside Earth, or, as we now see in California's San Andreas Fault, they may grind past one another and create earthquakes. This picture of a dynamic change in the Earth's crust occurring over eons is widely accepted now, but in those days there were many skeptics. The theory made sense to me, though, and I felt that my research, which would focus on how the North American and Eurasian plates pulled apart beneath the Gulf of Maine, creating the North Atlantic, could help make the case. Becoming a scientist means a lot of reading, hundreds and hundreds of scholarly articles to catch up on the background and figure out what to focus on when I went out into the Gulf of Maine. Reading still did not come easy to me, though. When I took the graduate record exam, I had scored in the 95th percentile in math, but my verbal score put me in the 41st percentile, 460 out of 800. I was aware of how much noise distracts me too, so as I got into my research in the spring of 1970, I needed to find a place of silence where I could focus. Thank God for libraries. Margie and I were living in a small house. Our son Todd was a year and a half, and another son, Douglas, was on the way. We needed more space, but we couldn't afford much. I spotted a 16-room farmhouse in nearby Hatchville near Falmouth, Massachusetts. A wreck of a place that had been built in the 1600s and one step from the bulldozer. It cost only $20,000, and I put down $4,000 from the severance pay I'd gotten from the Navy. I told myself it showed promise and figured I could fix it up. But when my mother finally saw it, all she could muster up was, "You've got to be kidding." I also needed an outlet to burn off my excess energy, and I figured that rebuilding the house room by room would do the trick. I'll have to stop there.